Watch the space, the varied perspectives. These are the journalisms by way of analytic aggregation, illuminated from the critical research of a historiographer, neither from the Oriental nor the Occidental. Your engagement through a like, a share, or a sub will accelerate us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. Engage.
Engage impulse engines. Engage. Engage.
Engage.
Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage.
Engage.
Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Captain.
Engage emergency override.
Engage. 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 Engage forward shields 35%. Engage.
Engage the cloaking device.
Engage.
Of them. Engage them in conversation.
Engage. Engage.
Russia ratchets up its presence at the UNSC, including defending Syria from Israel. Watch this space. Foreign Ministry said worried by worsening Russia tone over Israel actions in Syria. Unnamed official says Jerusalem concerned Moscow may promote formal resolution at UN Security Council. Report comes days after Israel said to authorize anti-drone tech to Kiev. And this is from the Times of Israel. At Russia's request, the UN Security Council discussed strikes in Syria attributed to Israel, a sign of hardening in rhetoric from Moscow toward Jerusalem, Channel 13 News reported Friday. The Security Council discussion came after a report the Zionists have authorized the sale of defensive military equipment to Kiev for the first time since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Russia's representative reportedly told the council that the violent attacks by the Zionists affect the entire region and must stop. The Zionist unilateral actions affect the entire region. The Security Council should work to convey a clear message to Israel on the issue. According to Channel 13, the change of tone from Russia was noted in a diplomatic cable sent to the Foreign Ministry. An Israel official told the outlet that Jerusalem had not anticipated that Russia would call for a discussion on the matter, and there were concerns Moscow could try to promote a resolution against the Zionists at the Security Council. This is a measured worsening of Russia's tone towards the Zionists. We're following the progress of Russian steps closely, the unnamed official said. Russia is set to hold the presidency of the UN Security Council in April as part of the planned rotation of the seat. And according to Wikipedia, the role of the presidency of the United States or the United Nations Security Council is as such. The presidency derives responsibility from the provisional rules of the procedure of the UN Security Council, as well as the Council's practice. The role of the President involves calling the meetings of the Security Council, approving the provisional agenda proposed by the Secretary General, presiding at its meetings, deciding questions relating to policy, overseeing any crisis, and the President's authorized to issue both presidential statements subject to consensus among council members and notes, which are used to make declarations of intent that the full Security Council can then pursue. The President's also responsible for reading statements of the Security Council to the press. The holder of the presidency is considered to be the face and spokesperson of the UNSC. The holder of the presidency may appeal to parties in a conflict to exercise restraint. The President represents the Security Council before other United Nations organs and member states. They also call upon members to speak, to send applications for the UN membership to a committee, the UNC, and deciding vote order. Particularly after the end of the Cold War, the President has worked to coordinate the UNSC with other organs. The President's authority to rule upon points of order, which can be put to a vote if a member of the Council challenges it. They also name members of various subsidiary organs and are generally responsible for maintaining order. Since November 2000, the President has generally prepared background papers for the topic being discussed. The President also continues to represent their state. If the nation's involved in a conflict, this may apply, the UNSC is discussing. They're expected to temporarily step down. Conversely, because the presidency rotates monthly, all nations on the UNSC can evenly emphasize issues important to them. That makes sense. So finding that balance between being biased and also just advocating for self is something that we're definitely going to see in action in April. Most non-permanent states hold the presidency once or twice during their 2-year terms. Burkina Faso changed its name from Upper Volta in August 1984 during its term and held it 3 times. That's apropos, what's going on in France, colonialism, which Burkina Faso was affected by, and the idea that when they held the presidency in 1984, they changed their name from Upper Volta, which is a colonialist name. So the presidency does have some sway or influence in a certain way that he may not have if he or she is not in that position. And the president often makes a distinction between when they are speaking as the president and as the representative of the state. Very interesting. All right, and this is from Crux. Russia's aggressive tone on Syria strikes worry Israel. Tel Aviv fears Moscow-backed resolution at UN. Putin trying to stall Netanyahu's military aid to Ukraine. The UN Security Council reportedly discussed strikes in Syria attributed to Zionists at the behest of Russia's requests. The discussion came after a report revealed that Israel has authorized the sale of defensive military equipment to Ukraine. Russia's representative reportedly told the council that the violent attacks by Israel affect the entire region and must stop. The representative said the council should work to convey a clear message to the Zionists on the issue. According to Channel 13, the change of tone from Russia was noted in a diplomatic cable sent to the foreign ministry. Israel officials had not anticipated a discussion on the matter and feared Russia could next pull a resolution against the country at the council, or push a resolution. This is a measured worsening of Russia's tone towards Israel. We're following the progress, an unnamed Israeli official said to Channel 13. Russia will likely hold the presidency of the UN Security Council in April as part of the planned rotation of the seat. Israel's planned aid to Ukraine riles up Russia? That's speculative. The apparent shift in tone from Russia came as Israel has reportedly authorized the sale of defensive military equipment to Kiev. Yep, this may be a repeat. Let's see. Oh, this includes export licenses for 2 companies to sell electronic warfare systems with a range of 40 kilometers against drone attacks. The export licenses were approved by Eli Cohen, Israeli Foreign Minister, and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant in mid-February. Cohen then informed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky of the decision during his visit to Kiev. Zionist officials say the approval of the export licenses was not a shift in policy, as the weapons were of defensive nature. Zionists approved the licenses also to possibly see how the systems perform against Iranian drones that Russia uses in Ukraine. Why did the Zionists resist sending weapons to the Ukraine? Netanyahu's office said this week he held a discussion with the defense brass on Israel's policy regarding aid to Ukraine. The National Security Council reportedly presented Ukraine's demands and its expectations of receiving Zionist defense systems, air defense systems. Netanyahu was also briefed on Zionist sensitive nature of relations with Russia, the Ynet news site reported. Israel's resisted repeated calls by Ukraine and its Western allies to provide weapons to Ukraine following Russia's invasion. Tel Aviv also cast itself as a mediator, with then PM Bennett flying to Moscow to meet President Putin just days after he invaded Ukraine. Bennett also held a series of calls with Russian and Ukrainian presidents over a span of several weeks without any breakthrough. Zionists have also been wary about risking a Russian response to its airstrikes on alleged Iranian targets inside Syria. And okay, that video froze a bit, so let us move on. And we'll be back with more news. And from AA.com.tr, Hamas and Hezbollah hold talks on Palestinian regional developments. Meetings come amid rising tensions in occupied West Bank. Palestinian movement Hamas held talks on Sunday with Lebanese group Hezbollah on developments in the occupied territories, the movement said in a statement. Our Hamas delegation, led by political deputy chief Salah al-Aruri, met with Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon. Both sides reviewed the latest developments in occupied Palestine, especially the resistance in the West Bank and Jerusalem, and the internal events inside Israel, the Hamas statement said. Israel's seen mass protests over the past 2 months over a planned judicial overhaul by the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, seen by the opposition as an attempt to reduce the powers of the judicial authority in favor of the executive authority. Sunday's meeting came as tensions have been rising across the occupied West Bank in recent months amid repeated Israeli raids into Palestinian towns. Nearly 90 Palestinians have been killed by Zionist fire since the start of this year. Hamas Hezbollah hold talks on Palestinian regional developments. Palestinian movement Hamas held talks on Sunday with Lebanese group Hezbollah on developments in the occupied territories. The movement said in a statement, Anadolu reports. A Hamas delegation led by political deputy chief Salah al-Aruri met with Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon. Both sides reviewed the latest developments in occupied Palestine, especially the resistance in the West Bank and Jerusalem, and the internal events inside Israel. The Hamas statement said the Zionists have seen mass protests over the past 2 months over planned judicial overhaul by the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And from Naharnet, which looks to be a Lebanese outlet. Hezbollah chief Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah has met with a senior Hamas delegation led by Sheikh Salah al-Aruri, the deputy head of the Palestinian movement's political bureau, Hezbollah said on Sunday. According to Hezbollah's statement, Nasrallah and the delegation discussed the latest developments in occupied Palestine, especially the heroic and brave resistance in the West Bank and in Al-Quds. They also attacked the domestic events in the usurper Zionist entity, the political developments in the region, and the responsibilities of the resistance movements and the entire axis of resistance in this historic period, the statement said. And from Al-Mayadeen, Hamas delegation meets with Nasrallah. Hezbollah Secretary General Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah meets with the deputy head of the political bureau of Hamas, Salah al-Aruri. Hezbollah Secretary General Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah met with deputy head of the political bureau of Hamas, Salah al-Aruri, and his accompanying delegation on Sunday. The two leaders discussed and assessed the political and field developments in Palestine, most notably the resistance in the occupied West Bank and Al-Quds, and the mounting internal political crisis within the Israeli occupation. They also reviewed regional political developments, the obligations of resistant movements, and the overall Axis resistance in this historical period. This comes shortly after Hezbollah Secretary General Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah received a delegation from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad movement, headed by PIJ Secretary General Ziad al-Nakhala. The meeting saw the two leaders discussing the situation in the region and the challenges facing the Palestinian resistance. Both Sayyid Nasrallah and al-Nakhala underlined the continuation of bilateral consultation and coordination in order to bolster resistance against the Zionist occupation. Moreover, they voiced their appreciation for the heroism of the Palestinian people, as well as that of the brave fighters who have been bravely confronting the Zionist occupation's gangs and criminal army on Palestine territories, especially in Al-Quds and the West Bank. All of the developments taking place in the West Bank and the Palestinian interior are highly important in the struggle of resistance, Sayyid Nasrallah said last week, stressing that the turning point for the Israeli occupation today is that there's a prevailing culture similar to what happened during the forced May 25th withdrawal from southern Lebanon. Today, the priority should be extending a helping hand to the Palestinian fighters, pushing the Israeli occupation into the abyss, he underlined. Furthermore, the military affairs commentator of the Israeli Channel 13, Alon bin David, recently said that Sayyid Nasrallah is reading the situation in Zionist-occupied Palestine correctly, and everyone observing the events in the entity realizes that the Zionist occupation and its society is falling apart. He added that everyone who looks at Zionists, whether at home or abroad, realizes that Israeli society is shattered and divided, stressing that the Zionist enemies are encouraged by what's happening inside Israeli society today. Knesset member and former Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot also said that Israel's passing through one of the most dangerous security periods since the Yom Kippur War, in reference to the 1973 October War. What came out of that? The Oslo Accords, I think. All right. From Press TV, Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad chiefs meet in Lebanon for talks on closer coordination against the Zionists. The two sides review the challenges facing the Palestinian resistance during a meeting in a southern suburb of Beirut on Saturday, and underlined the need for greater future cooperation between the two movements in a way that could further bolster the resistance front to Zionist plots, Lebanon's Arabic-language Al-Mayadeen television news network reported. Nasrallah and Nakhala also praised the heroism of the Palestinian nation and the bravery of resistance fighters who've been courageously standing up against Israeli militia groups and military forces across the occupied Palestinian territories, especially in Al-Quds and the West Bank. Last week, the Hezbollah leader stressed the significance of all developments taking place throughout Palestinian lands. Special attention should now be paid to rendering assistance to Palestinian resistance fighters who are trying to push the occupying Israeli regime into the abyss, he said at the time. Over the past few months, the Zionists have ramped up attacks on Palestinian towns and cities throughout the occupied territories. As a result of their attacks, dozens of Palestinians have lost their lives and many others have been arrested. Most of the raids have focused on Nablus and Jenin, where Zionist forces have been trying to stifle a growing Palestinian resistance in the occupied territories. Local and international rights groups have condemned Zionists' excessive use of force and shoot-to-kill policy against Palestine. And from Memo, Islamic Jihad leader holds talks with Hezbollah chief in Lebanon. Leader of Palestinian group Islamic Jihad Ziad al-Nakhala met Saturday with Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon, Anadolu reports. A statement by the Palestinian group said talks between the two sides took up a regional development theme, and challenges facing the Palestinian resistance were discussed as well. The two sides agreed to continue consultation and coordination with a view to enhancing the resistance against Israel, the statement said. Tensions escalate across the occupied West Bank in recent weeks amid repeated Israeli military raids into the Palestine towns. According to Palestinian figures, at least 88 Palestinians were killed by Zionist fire since the beginning of this year. 14 Israelis were also killed in separate attacks during the same period. And from almanar.com.lb, Hamas delegation meets with Saeed Nasrallah. Hezbollah Secretary General Saeed Hassan Nasrallah received a delegation from Palestine's Hamas resistance movement led by its Politburo deputy head Salah al-Aruri. Saeed Nasrallah and al-Aruri tackled the latest developments in occupied Palestine, especially the heroic resistance operations in the West Bank and Al-Quds, as well as the internal conflict in the Zionist entity. They also discussed the latest political developments in the region, as well as the responsibilities placed on the resistance movements and the entire axis of resistance in this historical stage. And Saeed Nasrallah welcomes Nakhala addresses on Wednesday morning service of late Hezbollah commander al-Shami. And this is also from Al-Manar. Hezbollah Secretary General Saeed Hassan Nasrallah welcomed the Secretary General of Palestine's Islamic Jihad Ziad Nakhala and the accompanying delegation. The meeting reviewed the general situation in the region as well as the challenges facing the Palestinian resistance, reiterating coordination between the two sides to confront the Zionist enemy. The conferees also held the heroic feats of the Palestinian people and resistance fighters facing the Israeli gangs in the occupied Al-Quds and West Bank. Saeed Nasrallah is scheduled to address the memorial service held at Mushtaba complex in Beirut's Dahiyeh on Wednesday at 15:30 to mourn the late Hezbollah commander Hussein al-Shami, the Director General of Al-Qard al-Hassan Association. And watch this space. We'll be back with more news. And from electricitymagazine.ca, diplomacy. Tehran and Baghdad signed a border security agreement. Iraq's National Security Advisor Qasem al-Araji meets with Iran's Supreme National Security Council Ali Shamkhani in Baghdad on March 19, 2023. Iraqi Defense Media Center reported. Senior Iranian defense official Ali Shamkhani signed an agreement in Baghdad on Sunday to protect the border between Iran and Iraq, where anti-Iran Kurdish groups targeted by Tehran are based. Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammad Zia al-Sudani's office said. The agreement includes coordination in the defense of common borders and coordination of cooperation in several security areas, Iraqi services noted. The visit comes ahead of the 20th anniversary of the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq. Today, ties between Baghdad and Tehran are closer than ever, and Mr. Soudani's government's backed by a pro-Iranian parliamentary coalition. However, some Western capitals caution against Iran's greater influences in neighboring Iraq, which has seen the U.S. as its biggest enemy since the '79 Islamic Revolution. Iran's official news agency IRNA reported on Sunday that Ali Shamkhani had attacked anti-security and evil activities by counter-revolutionary and terrorist forces in the region and northern Iraq. He said the agreement signed on Sunday can completely and fundamentally end the evil activities of these groups. These anti-Iranian Kurdish units that took refuge in northern Iraq were bombed by Iran in late 2022, which Tehran accused of infiltrating its territory to carry out attacks and incite demonstrations. The Iraqi government redeployed its border guards to contain tensions. At the time, Iran was rocked by a protest movement following the death on September 16th of a young Kurdish woman, Mahsa Amini, who was arrested by paramilitary forces for violating the women's dress code. Iraq was one of the mediators in the discussion between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which cut diplomatic ties in 2016 and announced the resumption on March 10th. Ali Shamkhani was the mastermind behind the Iranian side. During his visit to Baghdad, he was accompanied by the governor of the central bank and the deputy minister responsible for economic affairs, IRNA reported. Trade's essential for both partners, especially in terms of energy. Iraq's highly dependent on its neighbors for gas and electricity. And from MENA, Iran's top security official in Baghdad as border security agreement is signed. Iraq and Iran on Sunday signed an agreement to improve security cooperation between the two neighboring countries, focusing mainly on protecting the borders, according to statements issued by the Iraqi Prime Minister's office. Iran's Supreme National Security Council Secretary Ali Shamkhani, who flew to Iraq's capital Baghdad earlier on Sunday, signed the accord with his Iraqi counterpart, National Security Advisor Qasem al-Araji, in the presence of Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, the statement said. The headquarters of Turkey's Kurdistan Workers' Party of PKK and the Kurdish Democratic Party of Iran, KDPI, are in Iraq's Kurdistan region. They've recently been the targets of almost daily cross-border attacks by Turkey and Iran. Iran and Turkey accused the groups of activities in Iraqi territory to destabilize their security by either launching attacks or fueling unrest. Under pressure from Ankara and Tehran, Iraq late last year sent border guard units to its border with the two countries in an effort to stop continuous attacks by dissident Kurdish groups. During his meeting with Mr. Shamkhani, Mr. al-Sudani stressed on Iraq's firm stance that he rejects using Iraqi territories as a launching pad for aggressions against neighboring countries, said the statement. Mr. al-Sudani also underlined his firm rejection of letting Iraqi territories be a harbor for armed groups. While on his way to Baghdad, Mr. Shamkhani visited a memorial to Major General Qasem Soleimani on the airport road. The former commander of Quds Force, a division of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, and Iraqi militia leader Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis were assassinated in the U.S. drone attack in January 2020. Shortly after he left Tehran for Baghdad, Mr. Shamkhani's office said both countries discussed economic and security issues. The head of Iran's central bank and senior diplomats accompanied by Mr. Shamkhani. The visit by Mr. Shamkhani came days after Iran and Saudi Arabia agreed to restore diplomatic relations in a deal brokered by China. On Thursday, Mr. Shamkhani visited the UAE and met President Sheikh Mohammed and other senior officials to discuss opportunities for enhancing cooperation between the two countries. UAE's official WAM news agency reported. Mr. Shamkhani said his visit was a meaningful beginning for the two countries to enter a new stage of political, economic, and security relations, Iran's run IRNA news agency reported. Riyadh had severed ties with Tehran in 2016 after Iranian protests stormed the Saudi embassy in the Iranian capital following the execution of Shiite cleric in Saudi Arabia. Beginning in 2021, Baghdad hosted several rounds of talks between Saudi Arabia and Iran on the normalization of relations. Oman also played a role in repairing those relations. This month, Riyadh and Tehran's deal to restore diplomatic relations and to reopen embassies brought hopes of reducing tensions in this region, mainly in Yemen, where Saudi Arabia has been at war with the Iran-aligned Houthi militia since 2015. And, this is, I'm not sure the location of the production of this source, but, there has to be some evolution of language. Of course, we have to stop mispronouncing in Anglo cultures, we have to stop mispronouncing Iran and Iraq. And also to say that the Houthis are a militia, and simply that when they're a political entity, just as Hezbollah and Hamas are, we must say that they're political entities, especially in diplomatic environments, not unlike what I want this project, TR News, to be. So, diplomatically, the Houthis are not a militia. Diplomatically, the Houthis have been elected. Hamas has been elected. Hezbollah has been elected. So, they move beyond being militias and, violent extremists. And when they're, summoned by their people to represent them on the political stage. And from TVP World, Iraq and Iran signed deal to tighten border security. Iraq and Iran have signed a new border security agreement at tightening security on the frontier with Iraq's Kurdish region. According to Iraqi officials, the deal includes coordination to protect the common borders between the two countries and consolidate cooperation in several security fields. The joint security agreement was signed by Iran's Supreme National Security Council Secretary Ali Shamkhani and Iraq's National Security Advisor Qassam al-Araji. The Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed al-Sudani was also present. One Iraqi security official who attended the signing revealed that under the signed security deal, Iraq pledges it would not allow armed groups to use territories in the Iraqi Kurdish region to launch any border-crossing attacks on neighboring Iran. Iran has accused Kurdish dissidents of posing a threat to its security and has been concerned about the presence of Israeli spy agency Mossad in the autonomous Iraqi Kurdish region. And this is preposterous what's happening with the Kurds, right? So we have an issue, they have an issue recognizing a Houthi government, but they somehow recognize the autonomy of a Kurdish region in between Iraq and Iran. Last year, Iran's Revolutionary Guards launched missile and drone attacks against Iranian Kurdish groups based in northern Iraq, accusing them of fomenting protests that were sparked by the death of an Iranian Kurdish woman while in police custody. Speaking in Tehran, Iran Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian said that Shamkhani's current trip to Iraq has been planned for 4 months and is focused on issues related to the armed groups in northern Iraq. He added that Iran would not expect threats from Iraqi territories. The new agreement is expected to bring greater cooperation between Iraq and Iran in several security fields, which could help improve the security situation in the region. The deal also highlights the importance of maintaining strong ties between the two countries to ensure peace and stability in the region. And from Al-Manar, Shamkhani to sign Iran-Iraq security deal in Baghdad visit. Security of Iran's Supreme National Security Council Ali Shamkhani will reportedly sign a bilateral agreement on security cooperation with Iraq during a visit to Baghdad. Accompanied by Governor of the Central Bank of Iran and 2 foreign ministry deputies, Shamkhani left Tehran for Baghdad on Sunday morning at the invitation of Iraq's National Security Advisor Qassam al-Araji. In addition to meetings with senior Iraqi political and economic officials, Shamkhani is scheduled to sign a document on mutual security cooperation that was being prepared for months. The agreement would commit Iran and Iraq to safeguarding the principles of good neighborliness and protecting the common border. The deal is believed to have a significant role in ending the illegal presence of anti-Iranian armed groups and the elements affiliated with the Zionist regime in the Iraqi areas adjacent to Iran's northwestern border regions. Shamkhani's visit to Iraq, made days after a landmark trip to the United Arab Emirates, comes after Iran and Saudi Arabia announced their decision to restore ties. Following days of intensive talks in Beijing, Iran and Saudi Arabia agreed on March 10th to resume their diplomatic relations and reopen their embassies and diplomatic missions within at most 2 months. Arab governments neighboring Iran have eagerly welcomed the rapprochement between the two regional heavyweights. And from newsjohnny.com, signing agreement between Iraq and Iran to tighten border security. A statement from the Iraqi Prime Minister and his office said the joint security agreement includes protecting the common borders between the two countries and strengthening cooperation in several security sectors. Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council Ali Shamkhani signed the agreement with Iraq's National Security Advisor Qasem al-Araji in the presence of Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed al-Sudani. The Iraqi minister says the $27 billion total energy deal is in the final stage of negotiations, and under the signed security agreement, Iraq promises not to allow armed groups to use its territory in the Iraqi Kurdish region to launch any cross-border attacks on neighboring Iran, an Iraqi security official said. The border gained renewed attention last year when Iran's Revolutionary Guard launched missile and drone strikes against Iranian Kurdish groups based in northern Iraq, accusing them of fomenting protests that led to a Iranian Kurdish woman after his death in police custody. Shamkhani's current visit to Iraq has been planned for 4 months and is focused on issues related to armed groups in northern Iraq, Amir Abdullahian said in a speech to Tehran. He added that Islamic Republic of Iran will not accept threats from Iraqi terrorists under any circumstances. And watch this space, we shall return. Remember, your engagement through a like, share, subscribe will accelerate us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. And from the street, UBS. Let's see what that acronym stands for. UBS Bank. Probably something banking. UBS Bank. Acronym. Union Bank of Switzerland. Very good. UBS, the Union Bank of Switzerland, acquires Credit Suisse for more than $3 billion. Swiss authorities announced on Sunday that UBS will buy its rival to restore market confidence. It's the dawn of a new era in the history of European and world finance. An era marked by the disappearance of a bank created 167 years ago, but was weighed down by repeated scandals. Credit Suisse, once a Swiss and European financial flagship, will be swallowed by its rival and compatriot UBS, the Swiss government announced on Sunday, March 19th. The Federal Council is therefore confident that in this difficult situation, the takeover of Credit Suisse by UBS is the best solution for restoring the confidence that's been lacking in financial markets recently and for best managing the risk to our countries and its citizens, a government official stated during a press conference. A sign that the deal was driven by the government was that the government officials took center stage in the press conference announcing the transaction. UBS chairman Colm Kelleher and Credit Suisse chairman Axel Lehmann were placed at the far end of the table. It was the Swiss officials who took the floor first to explain the necessity of the forced marriage between the two Swiss banks, which are a national pride and the cornerstone of the domestic financial system. The merger between UBS and Credit Suisse is also the first major global banking operation since the 2008 financial crisis that devastated the global economy and nearly brought down the financial system. It comes after a crisis of confidence in banks sparked by the sudden collapse of California-based Silicon Valley Bank on March 10th, after interest rate bets went wrong. The crisis of confidence crossed the Atlantic and and hit Credit Suisse, a bank weakened by scandals, trying to turn itself around since last October. The Swiss authorities granted a loan of almost $54 billion to the bank on March 15th, but this was not enough to reassure the investors who continued to sell off Credit Suisse shares to the point where the bank's market fell, or the value of it, the bank's market value fell to $7.3 billion on March 17th. The transaction, which is an all-share deal, is valued at 3 billion Swiss francs, equivalent of $3.24 billion. Credit Suisse shareholders will receive 1 UBS share for every 22.48 Credit Suisse shares held, equivalent to CHF 0.76 per share. Interesting. The Swiss government has also responded favorably to a request from UBS for a financial guarantee in the event that the Credit Suisse's legal problems return in the form of fines or lawsuits. It'll provide a $9 billion backstop to the bank for the risk it's undertaking. In order to reduce any risks for UBS, the federal government's also granting UBS a guarantee in the amount of $9 billion to assume potential losses arising from certain assets that UBS takes over as part of the transaction should any future losses exceed a certain threshold, it said in a press release. The Swiss National Bank will also provide more than $100 billion of liquidity to UBS to help facilitate the deal. The transaction is not subject to shareholder approval, UBS said. The bank indicated that it obtained a pre-agreement from Swiss regulators, FINMA, the Swiss National Bank, the Swiss Federal Department of Finance, and other regulators on the timely approval of the transaction. This last measure risks provoking the discontent of shareholders, and it's likely to lead disputes before the courts, but it's also showing the race against time in which the authorities were launched in their effort to reassure investors. The deal comes after 3 days of intense talks which saw UBS and Credit Suisse very reluctant to tie the knot. The former felt the bank was doing well and didn't need to be saddled with the deal that could only bring it problems. The latter felt that its turnaround plan would need enough to recover, but the Swiss authorities feared that the crisis of confidence suffered by Credit Suisse would intensify and, above all, that it would spread to other banks. From Cointelegraph, Credit Suisse rescue plan may include nationalization, bondholder losses. A bank rescue plan for Credit Suisse may impose losses on its bondholder and even result in a full or partial nationalization of Credit Suisse Group AG. A rescue plan for Swiss banking giant Credit Suisse may impose losses on its bondholders and even result in a full or partial nationalization of Credit Suisse Group AG, multiple reports revealed on March 19th. Swiss authorities are considering applying losses to Credit Suisse bondholders as part of the bank's ongoing recovery efforts, Reuters learned from two sources. European regulators are concerned that the move might undermine investor confidence in Europe's financial sector. Another report from Bloomberg claims that the Swiss government's analyzing a full or partial nationalization of the bank, the only available alternative if the UBS takeover is not completed. Investment bank UBS is Switzerland's largest bank. On March 18th, the Swiss National Bank and Switzerland's financial regulator said that the Credit Suisse's acquisition by UBS is the only option to prevent a collapse in confidence in Credit Suisse. The nationalization would be an emergency option due to the complexities surrounding the deal and the limited time available. Swiss authorities are working over the weekend on emergency measures to accelerate the deal before Asian markets open, including allowing the deal to proceed without a shareholder vote. UBS is reportedly asking the government to shoulder around $6 billion on legal costs and potential future losses in the event a takeover occurs. UBS is offering $1 billion for Credit Suisse, a considerable discount under the bank's market value on March 17th of nearly $8 billion, according to company's market cap. And watch this space, we shall return.
It is obvious to the most simple-minded that Loci is of an inferior breed.
The obvious visual evidence, Commissioner, is that he is of the same breed as yourself.
Are you blind, Commander Spock? Oh, look at me.
I thought you scientists were supposed to keep an open mind. There's a difference between keeping an open mind and believing something because you want it to be true.
Your friend Spock is a logical man.
I find your arguments strewn with gaping defects in logic.
Most illogical reaction. We demonstrated our superior weapons. They should have fled.
You mean they should have respected us?
Of course.
Mr. Spock, respect is a rational process. Did it ever occur to you they might react emotionally? With anger?
Doctor, I'm not responsible for their unpredictability.
You do not think like the others. There are no colors to your patterns of logic. There's only
the whole notion of logic.
Logical, unemotional, completely pragmatic. And we poor, irrational humans whip them in a fair fight. Now you'll find yourself back among us illogical humans again.
Which I find eminently satisfactory, Doctor. For nowhere am I so desperately needed.
Because she feels. I don't. All I know is logic.
Will you try to understand how we feel about our life here? About each other?
Emotions are alien to me. I'm a scientist.
You're gonna leave here without them? Run off on some wild goose chase halfway across the galaxy just because you found a discrepancy in a hydrogen cloud?
Doctor, I'm chasing the captain, Lieutenant Uhura, and Ensign Chekhov, not some wild aquatic fowl.
Mr. Spock, you have a remarkably logical and analytical mind.
Thank you. I prefer the concrete, the graspable, the provable.
You'd make a splendid computer, Mr. Spock.
And from the Moscow Times, Xi and Putin hail ties ahead of journey of peace to Moscow. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping were to discuss Beijing's propositions to stop the fighting in Ukraine as the Chinese leader arrived Monday for a landmark visit with his counterpart in Moscow. China sought to portray itself as a neutral party in the Ukraine conflict, but Washington's accused Beijing of mulling arms exports to Moscow, claims China has vociferously denied. Xi's three-day trip serves as a show of support for internationally isolated Putin, just days after a war crimes tribunal issued a warrant for his arrest over the accusation of unlawfully deporting Ukrainian children. Beijing state media reported Xi arrived Monday in Moscow by plane for the summit, which is due to include a discussion of China's 12-point position paper calling for dialogue and respect for all countries' territorial sovereignty. One way or another, issues raised in Beijing's plan for Ukraine will be touched upon during the negotiations. Comprehensive explanations will be given by President Putin of the Russian position, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told reporters. Putin's welcomed Beijing's statements on Ukraine as being indicative of a willingness to play a constructive role in ending the conflict, while saying Chinese-Russian relations were at their highest point. Kiev on Monday reiterated calls for Russia to withdraw its forces from Ukraine ahead of Xi's arrival. The formula for the successive implementation of China's peace plan, the first and foremost point, is a surrender or withdrawal of Russian occupation forces from Ukrainian territory in accordance with international law and the UN Charter, the Secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, Alexei Danilov, wrote on Twitter. A day before Xi's arrival, a defiant Putin went to the Russian-held Ukrainian city of Mariupol, his first visit to territory captured from Kiev since Moscow's forces pushed across the border in February 2022. Xi's visit also comes just days after the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Putin on the accusation of unlawfully deporting Ukrainian children. Beijing said on Monday the ICC should avoid what it's called politicization and double standards and respect the principle of immunity for heads of state. The court should uphold an objective and impartial stance and respect the immunity of heads of state from jurisdiction under international law, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin told a regular briefing. The solution to the Ukraine conflict, he added, remained dialogue and negotiation. Neither China nor Russia are signatories to the Rome Statute, which established the ICC. Xi, who broke long-standing precedent to begin a third term as president of this month, has referred to Putin as an old friend. No limits friendship. Beijing and Moscow have drawn closer in recent years under a no-limits partnership that served as a diplomatic bulwark against the West. China's lambasted what it sees as U.S.-led campaign of pressure against Russia as Moscow's campaign in Ukraine drags on instead of calling for what it calls impartial mediation of the conflict. No single country should dictate the international order, Z wrote in his Russian media article Monday. China's also upheld an objective and impartial position based on the merits of the issue and actively promoted peace talks, he added. Beijing's stance has drawn criticism from Western nations, which say China is providing diplomatic cover for Moscow's armed intervention. They argue that China's proposals are heavy on grand principles but light on practical situations. The United States last week said China's proposal would simply consolidate Russian conquest and allow the Kremlin to prepare a fresh offensive. We don't support calls for a ceasefire right now, National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said Friday. Weapons for Russia? We certainly don't support calls for a ceasefire that would be called for the PRC and meeting in Moscow that would simply benefit Russia. He said, referring to the People's Republic of China, the country's official name. Washington's also accused Beijing of mulling arms exports to Moscow, claiming China's vociferously denied, or claims China's vociferously denied. Analysts say Xi's moves are unlikely to yield a rapprochement in the Ukraine fighting. Nevertheless, his trip will closely be watched by Western capitals. The Wall Street Journal has reported that Xi could also be planning his first call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky since the conflict began. Zelensky has said he would welcome talks with his Chinese counterpart. Xi and Putin are set to have an informal one-on-one meeting and dinner on Monday before negotiations on Tuesday. Putin's top security policy advisor, Yuri Yushakov, told Russian news agencies. And from MenaFN.com, China's President Xi Jinping touts stronger ties with Russia and vows to resist U.S. dominance. China's President Xi Jinping's upcoming visit to Moscow has been marked by emphasis on the improving relations between China and Russia in the 10 years since it took office. In an article published by Rossiyskaya Gazeta on Sunday, Xi highlighted this commitment to resisting the dominance of the U.S. and transitioning towards a multipolar world. Xi noted that the world is currently undergoing unprecedented changes and that the trend towards peace, development, and win-win cooperation is unstoppable. He went on to highlight the irreversible trends of world polarity, economic globalization, and greater democracy in international relations. The Chinese president also acknowledged the challenges faced by the world, including tradition, non-traditional security challenges, as well as damaging acts of hegemony, domination, and bullying. He added that the countries worldwide are eager to find a cooperative way out of the crisis and navigate the long and arduous path towards global economic recovery. Xi's visit to Russia will be marked by talks with President Vladimir Putin, and the Chinese president remarks suggesting a strengthening of the relationship between the two nations. Overall, Xi's message underscores China's commitment to forging stronger ties with Russia and resisting U.S. dominance in a rapidly changing world. From Al Jazeera, Russia, Ukraine, China's Xi arrives in Moscow for state visit. China President Xi Jinping has arrived in Moscow for a state visit in show of support for an increasingly isolated Russia. Xi and Russia's Putin published separate articles on Monday. Xi said China's proposal to end the Ukraine crisis reflects global views. As Putin said, he had high hopes for the visit by his good old friend. Russia's investigative committee said it had opened a criminal case against the International Criminal Court prosecutor and judges who issued an arrest warrant for Putin on war crimes charges on Friday. The Russian investigative committee had opened a criminal case against the prosecutor at the International Criminal Court, Karim Ahmad Khan, and several ICC judges, the investigative committee said. Turkish gas hub will take time, says Kremlin. Russia said that work to create a planned gas hub. That's another story. Great, so what do we have? Anything else on this matter? Okay, watch this space. We shall return with more news. Remember, your engagement through a like, a share, a sub will accelerate us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission.
Watch this space. Watch this space.
And from Press TV, Assad, war on Syria proved West acts against own claims on democracy. Assad made the remark in an interview with Channel 1 Russia on Friday, saying the West attempts to transform other countries into subordinate states by portraying itself as an advocate of pro-democracy and pro-freedom movements. The war in Syria has proven that the West will not change and seeks to transform other countries into subordinate states that meet its conditions, even at the expense of the interests of the peoples, the Syrian president said. Freedom is a beautiful term, but this freedom could be that of a person to kill, destroy, and do everything bad, and democracy for the West is to be an agent and subservient to them. Assad said Western countries seek to transform smaller and weaker countries into vassal states to satisfy their needs even at the expense of the interests of these nations. He said certain Western governments tried to persuade him to resign during the foreign-sponsored war, but they later realized that Syria fully understands Western policy. During the war, certain governments tried to persuade me to resign from the presidency in exchange for full immunity, the Syrian president said, without providing any further details and naming any countries. They gave up on these attempts for a long time ago and understood that Syria fully understands Western policy, that it no longer fools us. The U.S. and its allies invaded Syria in 2014 under the pretext of fighting Daesh. The Takfiri terrorist group had emerged as Washington was running out of excuses to extend its regional meddling or enlarge it in scale. The U.S.-led coalition sustains its illegal presence on the Arab country's soil, although Damascus and its allies defeated Daesh in late 2017. Damascus has repeatedly urged the UN Security Council to end the U.S.-led military presence in the country, saying that illegal U.S. deployments tantamount to occupation and aimed at plundering Syria's national resources. Former U.S. President Donald Trump admitted on several occasions that American forces were in the Arab country for its oil wealth. Elsewhere in the interview, Assad pointed to a potential meeting with Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan and said the interests of the Syrian people must be taken into account before any meeting with Ankara. Assad said contacts between Syria and Turkey had started the level of security and defense ministers, and a meeting at the level of deputy foreign ministers was under discussion. We can have a meeting at the level of foreign ministers, and the most important of these meetings is to achieve the interest of Syria and the war and stop the bloodshed. Turkey cut off its relations with Syria in March 2012, a year after the Arab country found itself in the grip of rampant and huge deadly violence waged by foreign-backed militants and terrorists, including those allied or those allegedly supported by Ankara. Since 2016, Turkey's conducted 3 major ground operations against U.S.-backed militants based in northern Syria. The Turkish government accuses the militants known as the People's Protection Units of bearing ties with the Kurdistan Workers' Party, which has been fighting a hugely deadly separatist war against Ankara for many decades. Syria has denounced the Turkish operation as a direct violation of its sovereignty, saying it reserved the right to respond to the incursions as it sees fit. And now let's look at a bit from Assad's Moscow interview.
الإرهابيين هي جيوش تعمل نيابة عن الغرب.
Let me adjust the volume here. Similarly, the terrorists are armies acting on behalf of the West in Syria and in other regions. Mr. President, could you confirm to us what was published by the Syrian news agency Sana about that the U.S. is continuing to train terrorists in its bases that are illegally located in Syrian territory, such as Al-Tanf? We're in direct confrontation with the terrorist groups that are positioned in the vicinity of Al-Tanf area. And of course, we know through these confrontations and from the people who were arrested where they came from. Al-Tanf is a whole camp of terrorists and has no other purpose. What does the U.S. benefit from its presence in the region, in the heart of the desert? Interesting. Okay.
وما الجديد في العلاقات الروسية السورية؟
Результаты вашей встречи. Что нового будет в سياسي؟ اللجنة المشتركة كان مختلفا ركز وإنجاح هذه المشروع.
هل من الممكن أن تضمن من المساعدات الإنسانية
الأولى لمساعدة سوريا
للولايات المتحدة
في عملية إعادة الأعمار
في جميع أنحاء العالم خلفت الكثير من الضحايا، فالناس تموت في سوريا والناس تموت حاليا في دونباس، كل هذا بسبب السياسة العدوانية للولايات المتحدة.
So now this is a bit about the policy of the United States and its allies and how that can be put to an end in the area. So you need several axes in parallel in order to reach this result, he says. The U.S. remains a superpower even if it's moving downhill. But we can't say that there's any other state that can stop American aggression, which has been lasting for at least 3 decades since the collapse of the Soviet Union, or even since the Korean War. However, there are different methods. First, if we speak about political actions, a coalition between a number of countries is necessary. Russia and China have significant responsibilities in this regard. And there are BRICS countries, and there are other countries that started moving away from the United States and begun to distance themselves from the U.S. and lose faith in it, and they feel that the U.S. is a threat to world stability. And when we say the U.S., this means with it the Western Bloc in political terms on the one hand. And on the other hand, the U.S. fleets in the world are all there to serve one thing. All the wars that it wages are for one thing, which is the U.S. dollar. And therefore, when there's an economic alliance, there will be an alternative to the dollar for any country which wants that. Then the United States will not be able to control the fate of the economy of countries and peoples, and then there will be an end to these wars. So we're talking about a political, economic, monetary issue. There are the BRICS countries, as I said, which are part of this alliance. And the international public awareness is gradually being formed, and therefore, over a period of time, the U.S. that is about to besiege the world will become besieged and will become isolated. And this country that wants to conquer the world will not be able and will not have the benefits of conquest, and then the situation of the world will change. I'm going to open up a channel here. Beam me up.
Beam me up, Mr. Spark.
Beam me up.
Lock on transporters. Beam us up. Beam us up. Quickly. Beam us up home. Beam us up.
Prepare to beam us up, Mr. Scott. Beam us up, Mr. Scott.
Prepare to beam us up. Scott, prepare to beam us up. Have Scotty beam us up. Beam us up. Beam us up. Scotty, beam us up fast. Stand by to beam us up. Scotty, beam me up.
Beam me up.
Beam us up now!
Stand by to beam us up.
No need to beam me up, sir. The situation is under control.